Hey guys, thanks for joining me tonight. Today we're going to talk about the Yongin Disappearance Case, a case in which up to 6 young women disappeared due to a mysterious and terrible taxi that went around. Now let's go to the year 2002. It was when the World Cup was held in Korea, so Korea was really exciting and crazy at the time. During that time, one night, late at night, a security guard was watching his camera footage when he noticed that through the camera, there were 2 young men around a car and they were acting very suspicious. Basically, they were trying to take the license plates off of a car. So, once they saw that, the security guard went down and basically had a physical struggle with the 2 young men. Eventually, the police were called and they came to the scene. Luckily, they caught one of the men. However, one of the other men fled. So, the police investigated the individual and the scene. They found the 2 men's car. Inside it, they found 5 young women stacked on top of each other in the back seat. They were no longer amongst the living. Inside the car, they also found shovel and rope with dirt on it, implying that it had been used sometime recently. They also found cash. So, they took one of these guys to the police station and investigated him. His name was Ho Jae-pil, and he was around 24 years old. The other individual who ran away was 28. And the 2 of them had met while they worked at a golf clubhouse. Now, in or around the time that the 2 met at the golf clubhouse, they got along well. They became boys. So the guy who got caught, Ho Jae-pil, had about $7,000 in debt at the time. His background was iffy. His parents did get a divorce, and he had to work as soon as he graduated high school. Kim Kyung-un, the other guy, had a background which was arguably very comfortable. His parents were both educators, they had stable, respectable jobs, and the finances were, at least on top of the facts, pretty stable and decent. However, he had 7 prior convictions for some sort of criminal actions, which was, a little bit of a surprise. Although, I'm not saying that just because you come from a stable family, you don't commit crimes, but, for someone who has everything so comfortably, the 7 priors were a little bit of a surprise to certain individuals. Now, both of these individuals made less than $1,000 a month, and as we know, Ho Jae-pil had to pay his credit card debt. And so, Ho Jae-pil claimed that one day, Kim Kyung-un came up to him and asked him if he wanted to engage in criminal enterprise. Allegedly, Kim Kyung-un also stated that if you target girls or women, you can make money easily. And so, eventually, they decided to commit crimes. One night, on April 18th, Kim Kyung-un drove near his hair designer's shop. As she left late at night, he drove up to her and offered to give her a ride. Although it may have been a little bit abrupt, the hair designer knew him, and so she got in the car with him. Eventually, they stopped at Yongin rest station, and then suddenly, he threatened her with a knife. She gave him her cash and cards, or they took it from her. Then, they made her no longer amongst the living via asphyxiation. They left her body on the mountain, and then they just went to work the next day like nothing happened. So, they waited a few days, but it seemed like there was no consequence for their actions, and so they moved on to their next. They knew they needed a cover, and so they had the idea of using a taxi to lure victim. They eventually stole a taxi sign and license plate and put it on their own. The same day they stole those items, they picked up a young piano instructor. They took her cash and card, They made her no longer amongst the living via asphyxiation. And then they moved on to their third victim. She was a young 20s girl. And think about this, guys. This would have been really scary because when these girls got in the car, they may have thought that it was just one man in the car, the driver. However, suddenly, a second man would show up. It would have been absolutely terrifying. On April 29th at around 5 a.m., just a few hours after their third murder, the two pulled up to 3 girls who were likely out partying or drinking or having fun. Kim Kyung-ho proposed to them, "Wanna have a drink?" So while it may have been a little bit risky, perhaps the girls thought, hey, there's 3 of us, what's the worst that could happen? And eventually, they got in the car. And once again, very terrible things happened. They stopped at a rest station, and one by one, they made the girls no longer amongst the living. And they also SA'd them. By the end of the deed, they stacked up 5 bodies in the back seat. And now they needed to move on to their next phase. And once again, they needed new license plates. And we're back to the beginning of the story when the security camera guy caught them. So now let's go to the portion where Ho Jae-pil was caught by the police. And let's see what his testimony was. At first, Ho Jae-pil admitted to only 5 victims. But on the side, police investigated and found the other body that they had disposed in the mountains. When the police pressured Ho Jae-pil with the evidence, he eventually admitted to it. Ho Jae-pil stated that they had stacked up those bodies because they were trying to get rid of them at the same time. When police asked, wasn't it scary? Ho Jae-pil said that it wasn't. Now, what happened to Kim Kyung-un, the guy who ran away? Well, he ran away to Pyeongtaek to hide where his sibling was living. Now it was either there or another room that Kim Kyung-un had gotten. But the police eventually tracked him down and cornered him. And Kim Kyung-un took his own LIFE in front of the police when they had cornered him. It seemed he had seen this coming because he had wrote a note in preparation for this. He said something along the lines of, "Father, mother, sorry, forget this sin-filled child and live your life. Sorry to my poor little sibling." That's tragic, but I wish he had felt more sympathy for his own victims. When Ho Jae-pil found out that Kim Kyung-un had passed away, his behavior and words suddenly changed. Basically, he wasn't as cooperative. Ho Jae-pil then stated that he never wanted to make the victims no longer amongst the living, but that Kim Kyung-un wanted to, because he was nervous about the crimes that they committed. One thing that was really weird is because at one point, Ho Jae-pil stated that both he and Kim Kyung-un used rope together to asphyxiate a person. Experts stated that when 2 people commit in such kind of crime, it doesn't happen like that. Usually, one subdues the victim, and the one other person is the one that does the action. With this in mind, we have to wonder, how much is any of this actually true? Because once again, guys, we're hearing this entire story through Ho Jae-pil. It's also a little weird that Kim Kyung-un was the one with the prior crimes, and Ho Jae-pil didn't. But suddenly, Ho Jae-pil was so okay with doing something so terrible to up to 6 people. Ho Jae-pil stated that the first one was very scary, but then as they did it, it became more and more easy. He even stated that he had laughed during one of them. There was a long trial process, and ultimately, Ho Jae-pil was convicted and his sentence was execution. Currently, he's still serving his time somewhere in a prison in Korea. And really, with this case, a lot of people have questions like, are the 6 people really the only victims? How much of a truth and lie is Ho Jae-pil telling? His other co-conspirator is obviously not around anymore, so it's hard to know. But yes, guys, that was the Yongin Ghost Taxi and more disappearance case. Let me know what you think.